what it means for us as Christians, the church, to be those that are not full of fear. Because when we are gripped by fear, we have our purpose and our calling significantly pulled back. In fact, A.W. Tozer says that what a scared world needs is a fearless church. The question is, are we fearless? And I feel like all too often, myself included, we are ruled and reigned by the fears that are in our lives. And what we want to do is explore that, look at that, and then also make sure that we are eliminating the fear that tries to creep in like a thief in the night to steal away the joy that God has for us. And this is part number 5, and we are looking at the fear of man. And this one is one that maybe some of you don't quite know if you have or not, and I think this is one that's probably going to creep up on you guys a little bit, but the fear of man is what we're going to be talking about. I fly a lot. I seem to travel around the U.S. a decent amount for different events, conferences, film shoots, kind of things like that. And in the process of doing that, you meet a lot of different people. You kind of people watch in the airport, and then you do everything you possibly can on the airplane to avoid eye contact. Right? Okay. So you sit down, and you go through all the motions, and you get to your destination. But I remember one time I was flying back, I believe it was from Tennessee, I think, flying back, and sat down, and I was in one of those sections where it had 3 seats, and I was right in the middle, so already not loving the situation. And I had 2 individuals, and please don't take any offense to this, but 2 individuals that were taking up part of my seat. I don't know, so we were sharing buddies. And so I sweat. It can be like 60 degrees and I sweat. It's just kind of like, So I'm already uncomfortable, already frustrated. And but it's okay, I'm not gonna be mean, I'm always nice. I'm not gonna, just be that guy. And so we're flying, and we're up in the air. So at this point, there's no turning back. There's no open the hatch, I can't handle this. Okay. So the person on my right starts doing one, I'm not gonna do it, but starts doing one of these things with their hair, and like debris is flying off of this person's head. Yeah, so I'm like, oh, this is great. And so I'm processing emotionally through what that means for me for the rest of this flight. And then the person on my left, no joke, the person on my left begins to take off their shoes. And then their socks. And I'm thinking to myself, this is an app. There's no way this is happening. And then the lady behind me, obviously of no fault to her own, for sure, but the lady behind me, her daughter, who is an infant, starts freaking out for the rest of the airplane ride. And so you kind of catch where I'm going with this. The person in front of me, so now I'm surrounded to, dandruff guy on my right. I've got Stinky Magoo over here on my left. I've got Psycho Baby behind me. And in front of me, this person apparently thought it'd be good to bring like Gouda cheese on or some sort of Munster cheese. I don't know what they were eating, but it was intense. So every sense that I had, I was sweating, I was just getting hit, I could feel things, emotionally, I was being attacked from all fronts. Obviously, I was not happy during that plane ride, incredibly excited when it ended. So I get through that, and I don't know about, maybe you guys have worse stories, maybe you have better ones, but you guys, at a minimum, understand what it means to travel with someone who's just the worst, right? I'm not the only one on that? Okay, we're just like, why am I paired up with this person? Why am I sitting next to them? Does this really have to take place? And I say that to say, we as people, it's okay for us to care about what other people think. In fact, there's a healthy level where we should care. These people that were around me should have had a clue. Somewhere in their childhood, something got missed, right? Just common decency, they just skipped that chapter. I don't know what happened. So it's okay to have a awareness of who you are, who is around you, and to respond accordingly. You don't, if everyone's in the middle of a prayer circle, you don't just walk in and be like, yeah, guys, what's up? I mean, it's, you kind of read the room, understand what's going on, and you respond according to the way that you need to respond. So it's good to recognize other people's thoughts, their feelings, and it's okay to even recognize those thoughts and feelings through the context of how do they perceive me. I really wish those people would have considered that. How, maybe instead of that disgusting cheese, how about some, I don't know, crackers or peanuts? That would have been a good option, alternative. We could have worked through that. I don't know, some Head and Shoulders. That's not expensive. I've seen it. They're very cheap. And the other guy, just keep your shoes on, man. No one wants that. So it's okay to care about what people think about you to a certain extent. And this is where we begin to miss it. This is where we have a tendency as human beings to kind of, if we're going in the direction like, I should be mindful, and then all of a sudden we get into it and we just like a hardcore veer off to the side and end up torpedoing ourselves to one ditch or the other. Those ditches are this. We are either craving people's approval. We need it so much. We can't live without it. In other words, we will change who we are. We will live out somebody else's expectation for our lives. So that's one ditch over here where you're living it, and you live so that people will approve of you and they will accept you. That's obviously not a healthy way of being aware of who you are in relation to other people. And the other side of the ditch is fearing rejection. And really, I guess they technically are somewhat tied together, but you live out of the fear that if I ever open up, if I ever become real, if I ever expose who I am going to be rejected. So you have the fear of rejection. You have the deep-rooted desire for approval, and we begin to fall into the fear of man. And like all the other fears that we have talked about, if we remain in those places too long, it will begin to dictate who we are. Not just how we act and we talk, but it will literally begin to reformulate who we are. We will become somebody that God never intended us to be. Our identity will be reshaped because of the fears that we entertain in our hearts. Either one of those, craving people's approval or fear of rejection, you need to understand that when we care too much about what other people think of us, it equates to idolatry. Jesus Christ has proclaimed over us who we are, who he is, what he's done for us, and what he needs us to do. It's all found throughout the Word of God. If you ever find yourself in a position of, I don't know what God has for me. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know why I'm here on this earth. I hear it all the time, and I understand that because all of us want that very clear identification. Do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you're going to guaranteed A, B, C, and D, and that's how you're going to live it out. And if we don't have that, we become frustrated, and we begin to think to ourselves that God isn't speaking, or for some reason we can't hear. But I think all too often, we're not engaged in the very basic commission that God has given us, which is the Great Commission, which is where we go out and we do things like we just did today, baptize people, make disciples, tell people about Jesus Christ. And here's the thing, when you're not about the Father's business, he is not going to make the things that you want in your life more clear. You must first apply your heart and your life to what is important to him before you're ever going to experience the next level. That's not even part of my message, just kind of an add-on side addition for you to have that. But when we care too much, it becomes idolatry. And what happens is we shift our focus off of what God has for us and what we are to be living out and how we are to be experiencing life. We move from that to a place of, what does this person say? The person that I want to date, or the person that I'm married to, or my boss, or my pastor. What is it that I need to do in order to fully walk in acceptance and avoid rejection? Proverbs chapter 22, verse 4. This is talking about the fear of the Lord. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches, honor, and life. I think all of us would agree that riches, honor, and life is something that we want. Here's something you need to know. God says that that's a reward for humility and fear of God. So in other words, it's not wrong to want those things. It's not selfish to want riches, honor, and life, because that's something that God wants for you. So don't think that that's wrong, but you have to do it in God's timing and in his blueprint. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches, honor, and life. Well, what's the fear of the Lord? Is it out of living out of this place of terror, like we're scared of him? He's a mean God who's going to strike us dead with lightning bolts. Many people believe that. Many people literally will not come into a church service because they believe that God is angry at them and God is going to be so fed up they're just going to be struck dead. And for many of us, we might think that's laughable, but maybe to a lesser degree, that's how we actually live our lives. To that extreme, maybe we won't buy into that. But many times, we won't even come back to God and ask for forgiveness because we feel he's angry at us. We'll spend days away from him because we got to get our stuff together before we can come to the grace of God. We live many times with pride and an unhealthy fear of the Lord. Fearing God has nothing to do with chattering teeth and hiding out in a corner hoping that God doesn't strike you dead. That's not the fear of the Lord. In fact, the definition, a good one, is this: an awareness of God's presence and intimate knowledge of everything that goes on in my life, combined with the understanding that God has ultimate control of what happens in my life, not people. This understanding, this intimate idea and concept that my God is the one that controls my life. My God is the one that supplies all of my needs. My God is the one that I'm to run to. He is my strong tower and my shelter. It is all wrapped up in not my will or others' wills. It's wrapped up in what is the will of my Father. That is a more accurate definition of the fear of the Lord. The reward for humility and the fear of the Lord is riches, honor, and life. Many of you guys remember this story in Daniel chapter 3 of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you can read the story later on. It consumes the entire chapter. But they find themselves as followers, as Israelites following the one true God. They find themselves in an area of their life, both in the culture, but also physically in a place where they are exiles, where they are not, where they are in a place of being rejected. Because their religion, if you will, their God is mocked and is not the true God. So King Nebuchadnezzar, he is here, and he absolutely hates the God of the Israelites. Hates him. He is 100% about himself, about building into his pride, his ego, and who he is. So the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, he begins to build an image of himself out of gold, a giant statue. And he tells everybody that when the music begins to play, you must bow down and you must worship the idol of me. Now, I mean, I think most of us would agree that if, let's just say, a president or anybody for that matter, our boss walks in and is like, hey, I just want to let you know, I just had a golden image made of me, and when all of a sudden you hear the Maroon 5 song playing, you have to bow down and start worshiping. Like, none of us, we'd all be like, whoa, 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 we don't like that. That's not cool. Like, we don't get that. But the entire nation did that. This is what they did, probably mostly because they were afraid of their lives being consumed by the fiery furnace. In fact, actually, that was the penalty. If you didn't worship the idol, you'd be thrown into the fiery furnace. So whether it be out of fear, whether it be out of loyalty, or even a deep conviction, either way, when the music began to play, they began to bow down to the golden image. And by the way, this music, as it's described in the Bible, is not just a noise. It actually sounds quite beautiful. Harps and trumpets and all these beautiful instruments. One translation says bagpipes. I'm not 100% sure why that's in there, but either way, it's beautiful music. I as a side note, I think it's interesting that that's how the enemy presents himself. He's not going to come in with this disgusting noise, just, ah! He's not going to do that, and everyone will be like, all right, let's bow down and worship. He comes in with this beautiful noise. Why? Because the enemy knows that many times our antennas are up, and we're trying to make sure that we're not deceived. So he comes in with this beautiful, sweet sound, and it may not be music, but it might be a suggestion from a friend. It might be a book that you're reading, a podcast you're listening to. He comes in, he sneaks in, because he knows that if he presents himself the way that he truly is, we'd reject him. But if he can present himself in a camouflaged way, maybe, just maybe, we'll fall for it yet again. So this happens. The music plays, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they do not bow down. Obviously, wrong answer when it comes to the king. So they're dragged before the king, and he begins to ask them, like, why is this true, and why aren't you doing it? And he gives them an opportunity. Are you going to do it? And they say no. So this is what it says in Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 and 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered, this is talking to the king, and said to the king, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Whoa! Can you imagine that, being in front of the president and be like, I ain't going to answer that question. Plead the fifth. Verse 17. If this be so, our God, who we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, in other words, if God doesn't deliver them from the fiery furnace, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set up. So what they're saying before the king is, listen, our God is going to deliver us. But even if he doesn't deliver us, I want to make it uber clear to you, I'm not worshiping your God, I'm not bowing down before you, and I am not playing your games. The response to that was incredible anger. He had the fiery furnace turned up to from 1 to 7 times hotter than what it normally is. In fact, when they opened the furnace to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in, the guards that were opening it up, they literally were consumed themselves by the fire. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown in, but the Lord preserves and keeps them safe. Can you imagine the tenacity, the boldness to stand before a world leader and say, I'm not even going to answer you. And let me just put you on notice. I'm not following you. I'm not buying what you're selling. And I am not going to walk under fear and intimidation of what you might do to me. Because my God, the true God, will deliver me. And even if he doesn't, I'm still not going to bend to your pressure. Can you imagine that? Amen. That, by the way, is being a fearless Christian. If you want to look for a definition of a fearless church, that's it. That says, you know what, even if I don't know the answer, even if I have a giant unknown out before me, it doesn't matter because my God rules and reigns and I am going to follow after him. That's powerful. That changes people's lives. And I think we need to do that and say that to the Nebuchadnezzars, to the kings, and to the voices of influences in our lives. We need to be able to say, and not that all of these things and people that I'm about to list off are bad. I understand that. But let's not be ignorant of what the enemy does. We need to be able to say to politicians that are not godly, I'm not buying it. My God rules. We need to say to the media and those who are movie stars and music legends, that if you're shoveling out stuff that doesn't point people to Christ, you can just keep it because I don't want it in my life. You're not going to define me. Those who are part of the news organization that tells us that as Christians that believe in the Bible and continue to press in and refuse to bend on what is true, that they call us radicals, they call us crazies, they call us bigots and closed-minded people, they need to hear that we are not changing because the Word of God doesn't change. That's what they need to hear. Every single voice, whether it be your best friend, your spouse, whether it be someone that you just met, every voice that would raise itself up against the name, the reality, and the truth of God must be denounced. We do it now. When it comes to people, we still love them. Our enemy and our fight is not against people. We always love people. But to the lie that they have either bought into or that they are trying to sell, we do not need to fall into that. No one makes you bow down to an idol. That's your decision. And yes, there's always a fiery furnace waiting for you. There's always consequences to not bowing down to what the stream of society says. There's always something that's going to say it's easier to just give in than it is to push forward. And if you do that, God still loves you. I want you to hear that. There's nothing that can separate you from the love of God. You must hear that. You must know that. That must be deep in your heart. But you also must understand that if you want to experience the full measure of what God has for you, you must be fearless, and you must put aside every fear that would weigh you down, including the fear of man. Every idol must be silenced. John chapter 12, verse 42 and 43. This is walking with God. This is Jesus in the midst of our lives. Some of us would think, well, it'd be a lot easier to follow after God if Jesus was right here with us. It'd be so much easier for us because he's in the flesh. But notice it says this, John chapter 12, verse 42 through 43. Among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, the place of acceptance, the place of social comfort. Verse 43, for they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Isn't that incredible? They literally stood with Jesus, stood with him. But because they were concerned about what the religious people, or another way of looking at it, concerned to what somebody's opinion of them was. They were concerned of the fiery furnace of being exiled from the place of comfortable worship, the synagogue. Because of that, and really out of the root of them loving themselves and loving the praise from men, they chose not to confess or to fully believe in Jesus. They compromised their belief because they wanted the praise of men. Again, back to the balance. We are either craving for people's approval or we're walking out of fear that we might be rejected. So the question I have for you is this, and you have to ask yourself this: who am I living for? Is it God or someone else? Now, if we can just be real, no one has to raise their hand. I'm not going to call anybody up here, but Christianese aside, whatever you want to, whatever maybe you have been trying to just convince yourself of, and well, these are my good intentions, and I've been trying. Just put it all on pause for a moment. Just take the noise down. By your actions, do you serve God? Notice that these individuals that followed Jesus, they believed in him, and yet they wouldn't confess him. So the question again is who are you following after? Who are you living for? Is it God, or because of the fear of man, are you living for someone else? Guys, I struggle with this just as much as the next person. I'd love to say that every decision I've made as a pastor wasn't out of concern of what someone might think. Man, if I change this leadership position, is someone going to be mad at me? If I cut this particular part of the service out, am I going to get a whole bunch of letters that are angry? If I put reserved seat signs up, am I going to have issues? I have to process. I love to say that I'm infallible and I don't process through those things like every other human being does, but I do. But again, if you reside in that area too long, you now are in the zone of being an idolater, someone who worships the opinion of men versus the calling of God. There's this picture, a very sad one, of an elephant in a circus. And you may not be able to see it, but this elephant has a chain attached to its leg, much like the rope that I have attached to mine. You know, when we think of elephants, we kind of think of them as just these beautiful, cool little creatures, and they're neat. But the reality is they're huge animals. They're incredibly territorial, and they have the power to just rip somebody to shreds. It requires a lot of training in order to get them, if you will, show ready. And I'm not trying to make a stand one way or the other as far as animal cruelty. Obviously, this is horrible. This is, in my opinion, this is unacceptable. But refocusing away from that for a moment, the way that they train elephants is they'll put a metal or really strong wood post in the middle of wherever they're training the elephant, and they'll put a short and very strong, thick rope around the leg of the elephant. And the elephant, as soon as that gets on, the elephant will run around and will start to panic and he'll try to get free, but it's just not getting free. It's a strong rope. It's a short rope. It's not going anywhere. And so they begin to train them. Sometimes they begin to even hurt the elephants when they're not doing the right thing. They shock them or they whip them. But eventually the elephant gets used to that rope being on its leg and it kind of knows its boundaries. So they change the rope out. They give a little bit more slack, a little bit more room, and not quite as heavy of a rope. And so now they got to retrain the elephant with having a little bit more of a radius that they can move in. So they go through the whole process again. And they keep doing this to the point in which the elephant understands and it feels the tugging on its leg, and it knows there's a boundary. It knows that there's something that I can't do. It knows that I am under the rule and the leadership and the reign of the person that is training me, and I am not my own animal. I am under the control of something else. And then eventually what happens is they'll actually remove, because they can't have an elephant with a chain running around a circus. We as people would revolt if that happened. So what they'll do is they'll remove the chain, but they'll still keep some sort of bracelet, some sort of chain around just the leg. Why? Because the elephant still feels that, still experiences that, and instantly, because it's fused into the mind of an elephant, because an elephant never forgets, it still knows that it's under the rule and the reign, and it's not its own, and it has parameters. And I think that's a lot of times where we're at as people. We have been under the rule and reign. We have been so conditioned and retrained and boxed in and pushed aside and pulled back by the opinions, good, bad, or indifferent, of those that are around us. We don't even realize it, but we begin to have ingrained on the inside of our very DNA that we must do something or not do something. We must live a certain way. We must talk a certain way, dress, eat, be around certain social circles. We must be X, Y, and Z so that we don't get hurt, so that we don't have to continue to be entrapped. In fact, Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25, the fear of man, there it is, the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Guys, we cannot allow ourselves to entertain the fear of man. The Bible literally says it is a snare. That's what the fear of man is. It is a snare for us. But whoever trusts in the Lord, that person is safe. It's been said, whoever you believe most will be the one that you serve best. Whoever you truly believe the most, that's the one that you're going to serve best. And I think for some of us tonight, some of us today, we have to begin to take a cold, hard look at our lives, identify whose voices we have allowed to be louder in our lives than God's, and then begin to ask God, by His grace and by His Spirit and by His Word, to wash over that area of our life, to begin to release the bonds of captivity and to begin to heal those deep-rooted ideas and thoughts that belong in our hearts. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. That's peace. So I would say this, if you have fear in your heart, you must, and sometimes it might even require verbally, you must identify that as not from God. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power of love and a sound mind. So quickly, here's how we overcome, or at least the beginning phases of how we overcome the fear of man. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5 and 6. Focus on God's presence and power. It says this, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Not that you want to become arrogant and fist to the sky, but there is an element of this. With God for me, what can man do to me? And even if they can do things to me that hurt and are painful and embarrassing, God's still for me. And if I'm in his will, he's going to walk me through it. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 and 25. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as we see the day drawing near. Do not forsake the assembling of each other. That's church right here, but I'd also push you a little bit further and say this. If you have a mentor, don't run from that person. Someone that's speaking into you, they're older, they have wisdom, they have some victories. Lean into that person, ask them, don't run, because that is forsaking that person's input into your life. Here at Radiant Church, we have things called community groups or even fearless groups. I want to throw this out there, even though fearless gets done in 2 weeks. Guys, don't just isolate yourself and go back to what it was. Hopefully, you've built some friendships. Hopefully, you have some people now that are in your life that you are willing to open up to and talk to, and that will speak godly wisdom into you. Don't forsake that. Find God-focused friends. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 through 25, Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. If you try to hold on to your life, I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to do the things that I see fit. If you hold on to your life, in other words, you try to save your life, you try to follow Jesus, but yet still be the Lord and the master, the boss of your life, Jesus says you will lose your life. But if you will intentionally and on a regular basis, every single day, God, I lay down my ambitions, my desires, and I give it to you. If you'll do that, you will find life in God. As we stand up and begin to worship God and get ready for this moment of worshiping God, we can go ahead and stand up. My prayer for you is this, and it's the prayer that I have for myself, is that when this thing's all said and done, when the party's over, the lights have been shut off, we've cleaned the mess up, and we stand before our Heavenly Father, my prayer for myself and for you is that we hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Guys, you don't have to fear man. I don't mean, I'm not saying that you're not considerate of other people. I'm not saying that you don't try to accommodate. Guys, listen, we need to love people, and sometimes we got to love them first before we can minister to them. I get that. We don't need to be one of those people that I just say what I want to say, and I do what I want to do, and if they don't like it, they can just take a long walk off a short pier. Name me one time that has actually saved somebody. We don't need to act out of ignorance. We don't need to be mean. But at the same time, let's not desperately crave the approval or live out of the fear of rejection. Let's move away from idolatry. And let's worship the one true living God.